Okay, so imposter syndrome, this is the dry Wikipedia definition, right? But imposter syndrome is that feeling that any second, they're going to come along, tear off your mask, and expose you for a horrible fraud that you don't really know as much about a certain topic that you're supposed to be pretty good at or an expert at. This is oftentimes felt by high performers, surprisingly, not low performers. Also marginalized groups, groups of diversity, people that fall into the buckets of diversity. But it's largely felt by everyone. I mean, if we look at the most common statistic you'll find online, approximately 70% of people feel imposter syndrome without any, without regards to race, color, gender, sexual orientation. 70% of people, humans, feel imposter syndrome. But there's a small asterisk there, and I'll get to that later on in the presentation. So just remember that there's a footnote regarding this statistic. I started to read about and learn about imposter syndrome just because at first I started feeling it. Everybody feels it, and I was like, what is this thing? Why do I not believe in myself? Why do I not have confidence in my capabilities? And I understood it's pretty prevalent. And so I wanted to find ways for myself, tools, practical tips for myself to work through it. So I want to share those with you today. I'm Sharone Zitzman. I'm the head of developer relations at AppsFlyer. AppsFlyer is the foremost mobile attribution and marketing analytics platform in the world. That's what we like to say. And I like to build open source communities. I lead the DevOps community, the cloud native, and I'm a co-organizer of the StatsCraft community in Israel. But I didn't start off in technology. Actually, my formal education is not in technology. I studied political science communications. In my previous capacity, I started off as building the open source community around our tool. It was called Cloudify. And then I like to say I moved up the stack, and I finished my career there as VP marketing. And then when I went on to new adventures, I realized that the part I enjoyed most about my role was actually the developer community building and everything that had to do with building out the open source community. And that's when I decided to go all in on that, and I went for a role that's solely focused on developer relations and developer experience. That's what I do today. I don't like to talk about myself much, but I was told to tell a little bit more about myself and my background. So I don't have formal technology education, so these are things that I learned on the way. So I'm going to start with the most basic thing. Why do we feel imposter syndrome? Where does it even come from? And it starts as deep as the kernel. It's something very subconscious, and it's a byproduct of many of the things that happen around us, the visualizations that happen around us, the things that we see, the things that we encounter, the people we work with, from the people that represent us in government to the diversity of people that we see as high performers. All of these things affect our perception of ourselves, of why we should be in a certain role, if we deserve to be in a certain role. How many people had the opportunity to be at a conference that was predominantly male-led? The lineup was predominantly male, an all-male panel, right? How did this make you feel? Did it make you feel like you deserve to be in technology, that there's good representation of people that are like you, that technology is an industry that welcomes women? I mean, there are certain things that happen that make you think, and it's very subconscious that, okay, if there are no women on this panel, maybe I'm not good enough, maybe I'm not strong enough, maybe I don't know this technology well enough, maybe people like me can't learn this technology as well as I can. It's not just women, it's not just a gender thing. I'm just saying, when there's less representation, this is what happens, and we start to doubt ourselves and our capabilities and our confidence. Okay, so I really like this. This was a part of a thread that really escalated on Twitter. Scott Hanselman, tech lead at Microsoft, started this conversation where he said that many times we don't attribute, as technology professionals, we don't attribute our success to luck, and many times luck plays a big factor in our success. And then all these men started chiming in and saying things like it's mostly their accomplishments and that they're so skilled and things of that nature. And then this guy chimed in with a really, I thought this was a jewel of wisdom. It's like I always say, I skillfully maneuvered my way into being born a white man in America. And I found this very funny because the statistics actually say that many times when women are asked about their success and reaching the success that they have, many times they attribute it to luck or circumstance. Whereas when you ask a man, they'll attribute it to their accomplishments and their capabilities, to something that's very well known. So I found that this was like right on the mark. But this eventually, it also translates to things that actually affect us directly. like job descriptions and the type of people that want to be employed in certain organizations, because there's a perception that these people will be better at this job than others. That's largely because of this. So my first tip when it comes to working through imposter syndrome is to start by challenging your cognitive biases. And what does that mean? And that means that's collectively for everyone to start thinking about cognitive biases. In 1974, Tversky and Kahneman, they wrote a paper called Judgment Under Uncertainty, Heuristics and Biases. And it was the first time that three specific things were identified, three heuristics were identified that affect our decision-making, our strategic decision-making adversely. It was representativeness, anchoring, and availability. So this is the first time that cognitive biases were actually identified, where we base certain decisions that we make upon, the availability of data that's very, very specific, or the first thing that you remember. You anchor your opinion to the first benchmark you read. And since then, many other cognitive biases have been discovered or introduced, and it's been well known that these affect our decision making. And many times, these cognitive biases are actually disguised as something positive. Ever hear the term culture fit? Culture fit, this person is not a good culture fit for our organization. But culture fit is very much a cognitive bias, right? It's a mirror image of ourselves. Culture fit many times is the byproduct of the values, education, background that we come from. The person that you're looking at is usually a mirror image of yourself. That's what we identify as culture fit, people we identify with. So just because people aren't from the same value system, education system, background that you are, it doesn't mean that they're not a good culture fit or the right fit for your organization to lead a certain role, to be in a certain role. And the interesting thing is that there are many different kinds of cognitive biases. Like availability bias is a good one, representativeness. Pop quiz. Off the top of your head, can anybody name the CEO of IBM? Nope. Not in Israel. Yes. Ginny Rometty. The outgoing CEO of PepsiCo. Indra Nooyi, the COO just appointed of GitHub. She was the co-founder of Bitnami. Erica Brescia. But everybody can say Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, and all the other men are much better known in this space. And those are things that are very much availability and recall bias, right? We remember certain people much better than others in certain roles because we think that they're better suited for those roles. So this is where I'm going to get to the asterisk. 70% of people feel imposter syndrome, but it's especially insidious among those that there are stereotypes that exist about them already. And what does this mean? This means that imposter syndrome, it actually has negative effects eventually on outcomes, on performance. This is a very popular survey that was done at the University of Michigan, and then it became a meme about how women and men perceive themselves in terms of the rest of the student body. Are they smarter than them? And then this meme came along. Does he bite? No, but he can hurt you in other ways. And this is an ongoing meme, but it eventually actually influences outcomes as well, right? So gender performance with and without stereotype threat. Women that perceive themselves as less capable in a certain area will perform less well. But this isn't only true for women, it's across the board. This is for all groups that believe that there are stereotypes about them. This was proven as early as the 4th grade. And they did a study across 4 years, 4th through 8th grade, of groups that believed that there were stereotypes about them from a scholastic perspective, and it eventually influences performance. This is the performance records for people in different racial groups in the United States from 4th through 8th grade in the same school. And eventually, it is a byproduct of what people perceive about you. So when you're feeling imposter syndrome, you're feeling less confident, know that if you don't fight through it, don't fight through the pain, it can eventually affect your performance as well. So this is the most important thing, and it's not a fluffy thing. This is an actual thing that you need to practice and apply. The first and foremost, in order to combat these cognitive biases, you actually have to know that they exist. That's number one. Be aware that cognitive biases exist and that you need to be making decisions based on objective data and metrics. That you're not just clinging to something like the first piece of information that you got about a certain candidate or some arbitrary metric that it's or a gut feeling, that it actually that you're actually taking substantial data and making intelligent and quantifiable decisions based on these. It's not fluff. It's something that we need to work on, because many times we do let our gut feeling make decisions for us, and it's not necessarily the right strategic decision for your organization. It doesn't mean that that person doesn't deserve to be promoted, receive a role, or lead a project because they haven't done it before, or because somebody like them hasn't done it before, or you remember something specifically negative about something they did historically. You need to look across the board about, with their performance, with their relevant background, and make decisions based on actual data. One thing that also affects our performance is whether we're feeling motivated or not. So one tip I can actually give you is to do what you can to be successful and neutralize the noise that is out of your control. And there are many of those things within organizations that affect our performance. So how many folks have read The Confidence Gap? Yeah. This was actually suggested by Aviva. She said to actually talk about maybe the confidence gap and how it applies to imposter syndrome, and there's a lot that's applicable. But evidence shows that women are less assured than men. That's known, but there's something that's really, really important in identifying this, and that's many times there's a difficulty between discerning between confidence and competence. Okay, Harvard Business Review conducted a study where it proved that many times incompetent men, many times white men, are promoted over their more competent, diverse peers because they have a certain confidence that says competence, and it's not necessarily accurate. Many times what it takes to get a job, a certain level of hubris that it takes to get a job, is not what it takes to keep a job. You need to have certain levels of empathy and soft skills in order to be able to be an inspiring leader. And then this creates what's called the N+1 shithead problem. Brian Cantrell coined this phrase in a talk of his in 2013 about scaling engineers and leadership skills. And I really like this illusion. The N+1 shithead problem means that many times somebody that's N+1 to you, somebody that outranks you by 1, or many times it's the person that you directly report to, they're a real shithead, right? And it's really demotivating. And it makes you feel really bad about your role within the organization, your growth potential within the organization. It makes you doubt your capabilities, right? And it's something that can really cause imposter syndrome. And his tips for neutralizing this is many times aligned to that person that is the shithead. There's somebody that is inspiring and somebody that we want to aspire to be like. So he suggests that you find somebody within the organization that's N+1 to you that you want to emulate and strive to be like, and motivate and neutralize the things that are out of your control and let that motivate you. But there's something else that's really important in what he says, and that's that you need to be driven by intrinsic motivators and not extrinsic motivators. Extrinsic motivators are pay grades, titles, promotions, things that are external to your capabilities. Intrinsic are the things that come from inside. So let's talk about defining success. How do we define success? So success needs to be defined by what you're doing and how much you enjoy the role that you're doing versus the things that you get for it. And these are the most commonly noted things that, 3 things that drive motivation. So there's purpose, autonomy, and mastery. This is something that's coined in the book Drive by Daniel Pink. I'll get to that in a second. But it's known that once you feel that what you're doing has purpose, that you have the autonomy to lead things within your organization, and you can master your area, you can become an expert. These by far drive motivation than extrinsic motivators. You don't need to be a senior distinguished principal engineer to feel that you have meaning within your organization. You need to be doing something that's meaningful. You need to feel that you're growing and constantly learning, that you have the ability to influence things that are meaningful within the organization, that are strategic to the organization, and that you are mastering a skill that's important to you. This book is a great place to start, Drive by Daniel Pink, and there's a really good animated video on YouTube that really summarizes it very, very well. Basically what he says is that it's been proven that anything that requires some level of skill or cognitive capabilities, it's very hard to motivate people with things that are intrinsic, money or titles or things like that. Eventually, what motivates people comes from the inside and how much they're enjoying what they do and how much they feel that they're growing. But that said, there is still a major gap between, pay grades for men and women within the United States. 61% is the metric that I found, and that's not because, it's largely because women are less represented in leadership roles. And this is many times because women have difficulty negotiating for themselves and advocating for themselves. So even if extrinsic motivators aren't important, when you do deserve a certain role, if you do believe that you have the skill set and what it takes, know how to advocate for yourself, know how to ask for what you want. This is something that's this is a big gap between men and women. They know how to do this very, very well. Women need to learn to advocate for themselves better. And you also need to look at organizations that place this as a priority. So Elastic on Equal Pay Day, which was April 2nd, and I'll explain what that is in a second, they put out a really interesting blog post where they emphasized the importance for them to reach equal pay between men and women. Equal Pay Day, April 2nd, is the date in 2019 that women need to work until to realize the same income as men in a full year's work. So 2018 all the way through to April 2nd, 2019 is the amount of time that women need to work in order to realize the same amount of pay as men did in 2018. So we need to learn to advocate for ourselves better and also know when we do deserve promotions, when we should get a certain project, and we should believe in ourselves and ask for them. We need to be better at that. Remember that failures are a big part of success. We don't do root cause analyses or postmortems on successes. We do them on failures. And we learn a lot from these things. We learn what we shouldn't do next time, how we can do things better, and they're a really, really big part of growth and learning. And when we grow and we learn, this is a big part of becoming successful. Growing, learning, achieving new things, succeeding the next time around. This is something that builds self-confidence, makes us understand that we know how to perform better and do better. I think that Bereshit is a really good example of what was considered a very publicized failure, but eventually everybody understood that it was a big win for technology and science. So we need to know how to fail gracefully and learn from these things and take each opportunity to grow and learn. We will expand our skill set, and this is a big part of being successful in combating imposter syndrome, by believing in ourselves and knowing that we learn new things and we'll do it better next time. But one thing we do need to also learn is to take opportunities to grow and learn and not be handed out. So Quindescent Zanks, who was until recently a developer advocate at Logs.io, now she's at AppDynamics, she recently did a talk called Unquantified Serendipity, where she talks about diversity in tech. And she says that there's this phenomenon called the hand up or hand out. And I really thought that was a really great illusion, where she says that many times when you're looking to understand how something works, a senior engineer will come along and will just show you how it's done. And it'll be very deterministic and opinionated to the way that they learn to do it. And you don't really learn from that. She says, instead of asking for a handout, ask for a hand up. Give me the tools. Teach me the way to learn how to do this myself so that I can be better the next time around. So do make sure that you take opportunities and you make sure to learn from opportunities and not take handouts all the time, because you want to be able to be an engineer with initiative and not be an engineer that does somebody else's opinionated, deterministic way of doing things that may not even be the right way to do things. I think eventually this is the most relevant and applicable and practical tip, right? All the rest is a little bit fluffy and you're like, oh, okay, whatever, all fluff. But this is actually practically applicable. I think one of the biggest contributors to burnout, feelings of burnout, is mismatched expectations between yourself and your manager, management, the organization, and with yourself. So you need to constantly align expectations and define truly realistic and achievable metrics. And in project and product management, these are called SMART metrics. They're specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-based metrics. This means I will rewrite this service in this amount of time. I will, this mission critical service for the organization, so it's relevant. I will solve this bug in this deadline. I will learn to write this language in this amount of time. Things that you can do that are measurable, achievable, that they're relevant for what you're doing. So it's not just like doing some project that's not relevant for the organization, it's just a waste of your time. Something that's relevant to the organization, to your job, and it's time-based, so you can measure it. In other worlds, many times this is called Kaizen. Kaizen is a concept that comes from Japanese assembly lines. It's something that's referenced in DevOps, Agile, and Lean. It basically means that small tasks, small wins in aggregate eventually translate to big gains for the organization. So when you're feeling imposter syndrome and you want to combat imposter syndrome, define small, achievable tasks. I don't understand why it keeps shutting off. And succeed at them. This will help build confidence in your skill set and motivation, and it'll help you keep, excited about the things you're doing. When you succeed at things, eventually these will translate to big gains, and you'll see, wow, I'm really moving the needle. So define specific tasks, succeed at them, like Kaizen, and then learn to celebrate them as well. Bug fixes, technical debt, quick wins, many times we relegate these, and these fall under buckets of invisible work, right? There's visible work and invisible work. Visible work is features, product releases, things of that nature, and those are fewer. Most of the large majority of the work that we're investing time in is things that are not very visible. If it's architecture and design, if it's technical debt, if it's bug fixes, and we don't celebrate these nearly enough. Charity Majors, the CEO of Honeycomb, she did a talk at DevOps Days 2017, and she said, we need to celebrate the engineers that refactor code, that remove code. These are the engineers that we need to celebrate, not just the ones that are rolling out features, because this is some of the hardest work to do. Dahlia will tell you about managing legacy applications. This is really, really hard work. But in order to make sure that also the invisible work is not invisible, learn to make it more visible, write blog posts, do talks about the things that you're working on, slaying the dragon, and other things that it's more visible, and that people know the things that you're working on. And like I said, with advocating, learn to also ask for things that you want to do, like certain features that you want to work on, or certain projects that you want to work on, and make sure that some of the stuff that you're doing is visible and quantifiable, and that you can celebrate them, and you can celebrate them to the organization. So make sure that there's a nice balance between the stuff that you're doing that's more visible and less visible, and the things that you're doing that are less visible, make sure they're known, make sure that you can learn from them, that the organization learns from them, and you can continue leveraging this knowledge. I think that's really important. And then also, once there's more visibility to your work, you'll also, again, feel more confident in your capabilities. There are better feedback loops, and all of these things contribute to helping you be more motivated and have more confidence in your skill set, things that combat imposter syndrome. And at the end of the day, learn to internalize praise. This is one of the hardest things for us to do. And I will tell you a small anecdote about internalizing praise. This is really exactly what it looks like, and this is the story of my life, right? I did this talk at Levelsim. It was a shorter talk. It was an Ignite. And a lot of the feedback I got was positive. Most of the feedback I got was positive. But then there was one person who wrote, "This was the worst talk of the conference by far." That was the feedback I got. And I was like, oh my God, this was the worst talk of the conference by far. I was like, how did I give such a horrible talk? And I had like 75% good feedback, but this person gave me this one insidious comment, and it gets under your skin. So the best advice I can give you is to learn to take advice from yourself as well. I wrote this presentation. It has all of the tips that I needed to work through my own imposter syndrome, and I was sitting there and feeling like like a real failure with that talk. So we have to learn to also internalize the things that we know. Some of these things we know. Some of this stuff isn't new to us, but we have to remember to learn to apply it. Applying it is the most important thing, and it's not easy, and it's not meant to be fluffy. It's something that takes time, and you have to work on yourself, and you have to remember, hey, I got positive feedback about this project. I might be pretty good at this. There will always be people that have, negative things to say, but try to focus on the constructive feedback. Try to see how you can make it constructive as well. If you receive negative feedback that isn't really actionable or constructive, say, okay, can you give me an action item on how I can improve next time? Can you tell me what I can do better? Give me the tools to learn so I can grow, deepen my skill set, become successful, and appreciate myself and have more confidence. And all of these things are a pie that, are constantly affecting the way that we feel about ourselves and what's driving imposter syndrome or not. And at the end of the day, when you learn to work through your imposter syndrome and you're starting to feel more confident and more experienced and more capable, and even senior engineers feel like they're not capable sometimes, learn to pay it forward. When a junior engineer is sitting in front of you, or just anyone is sitting in front of you and telling you, I feel like I don't know what I'm doing, I'm not good at my job, I suck at this, tell them, we all feel that way from time to time. These are the things I do in order to make myself feel better. I define tasks and I succeed at them. I remember that this is just a cognitive bias, and I try to challenge this last piece of data that I'm sticking to that isn't reflective of all of the data points across the board of my accomplishments, or all of these things that I remember that failures are a part of success, and that I'll learn to take the important learnings from that failure in order to grow for next time. And you tell them the things that they can do in order to work through their lack of confidence, and understand that everything is a continual learning process. And the more that we learn, the more experience we gain, the more that we know that we're human, the more satisfaction we'll have with ourselves, the better we'll perform, and this eventually helps combat imposter syndrome. That's all, folks.